Alright guys, so today we've got a set of forks off of a 1995 Honda XR200. This is the late model Honda XR200 fork with the drain bolt at the bottom of it. This is going to apply, I think it's somewhere in the late 80s all the way till they quit making the XRs. I'll put that information in the description so that you know what years this method applies to, but the same basic concept is going to apply to pretty much any conventional fork that looks like this. So to start with, pull it off the bike. One thing to remember before you pull it off that makes your life a lot easier, grab a 19mm wrench, break this cap loose while you still have the fork in the triple clamps, because it makes your life a little bit easier. Once you get it off the bike, take a screwdriver or something and release the pressure from this Schrader valve on top. These XR forks actually are designed to operate with some air pressure in them. And if you have any air pressure, don't ask me how I know this, but if you have any air pressure that you forget to bleed out, when you take this here drain bolt out of the bottom, you're going to get a mess of oil. That's the next step. Pull the drain screw out of the bottom. It's just this little Phillips screw that's in the bottom of the fork, and drain all the oil out of the fork. Exercise the fork back and forth, you know, push it in and out, and make sure you get all of the oil out of it. So once you get the oil drained out of it, the air, you know, bleed the air off, drain the oil out of it, then we're going to pull the spring out. So we're going to back this cap off, and this part right here, just note that this is what's holding your spring in. So it does have a little bit of pressure. The stock spring and spacer, it doesn't have that much pressure, but just note that it does have spring tension behind it. Then you're going to pull out the spring spacer, and if you push the fork down a little bit, be careful you don't lose these parts. This is a kind of a thrust washer that rides in the end of the spring, so you want to keep track of that. And then we have our fork spring. The tight coils will go towards the bottom of the fork, so you want to remember that for when you put it back together. So now we've got basically all the guts out of the top of the inner here, and this is where, so I've already got this clip off. This would be your next step here, is take a screwdriver and pop the clip out. This clip, if my camera will show you guys, is what holds in the dust seal and the fork seal. So they're both stacked on top of each other in this fork, and that clip is what keeps them in there. So once you've got that, the next part is going to be that Allen bolt in the bottom. So that bolt goes up in there and threads into a piece that's like a custom bolt, I guess I'll call it. I don't know what you call it, but there's a piece that's inside the inner, and it runs down here, and that Allen bolt threads into it. That's why you can't separate the forks right now. What I did to get that loose, because Honda has a special tool that goes down in the fork tube there and engages in like a custom 12-point like inner socket. Obviously I don't have that, so I took this old paint handle. This would be better with probably a wooden broom handle, and I slid it down, and what I'm doing is I'm just gonna use that to put pressure against that that nut, or that bolt piece that's in there. I'll show you guys once I get this thing out what I'm talking about, but I've got that in there so I can apply pressure to it. I've got an impact here with a Allen socket. This is a 8mm Allen, and I put it on there. I've already got this one broke loose, but I did it with a bigger impact, and it popped right loose. So if you've got a decent impact, take something, push and put your pressure on that so it doesn't spin, and hit it real hard with your impact wrench. And both of these came right loose with a DeWalt impact doing that. So go ahead and pull that bolt all the way out. That's it. Now that we have that bolt out, nothing is holding these forks together. Now, this part, if you've never done forks before, you're gonna maybe wonder if you're doing something wrong, because in this one I've had a part already, but when these seals are pressed in there from how they're supposed to be from being in there for a while, this fork, that's the only thing keeping it from coming apart. So you kind of gotta hit it like that and it'll come apart just like that. Be careful that you don't lose any of the stuff that's on this, and make note. Okay, so there's a piece that's down in here and I dropped it. So there's the piece that was down in there, and I'll show you guys. That piece was on the end of this. So all of this slides down in here. This piece may stay on here when you pull it out. It may stay inside the fork tube, or it may go flying across your garage. Just remember, this piece goes on the end of this shaft here, and this shaft can now slide out here. Be careful, because there is a spring that sits on that. So that's the way that goes, and then I like to put this back together so that that's a complete unit. This is what I was telling you guys about. That's what I pressed the hopefully my camera shows that. That's what I pressed my broom handle, or my handle, up against that. Ideally, Honda sells a tool that engages in that to keep it from turning, but if you just put friction up against this end and you hit the Allen bolt with a impact wrench, I had no problems getting both forks apart like that. It came right apart for me, so I don't think that those are torqued in there very tight. So once you get to this step, you just want to clean everything up real good. I'm using brake cleaner. You can use contact cleaner, whatever. Get everything nice and clean to go back with your new seals and everything. So we're gonna pull the old seals off, set those aside. We're gonna pull the washer and the bushing off. We're gonna keep that together. Look at the bushings. These actually don't look too bad. This one on the outside is a little worn, but the inside, which is the main part we're worried about, it feels nice. It slides up and down the tube real nice, and it doesn't have too much wear on the inside. So we're going to reuse the bushings on this one. We're just going to clean all this stuff up here, get it all spotless, and then I'll show you guys how it goes back together. Okay guys, so now we've got all the parts cleaned up, plenty good enough. So we're going to start putting it back together. So you don't want to forget the way that these bushings were in there. So this went like this. There's a slight taper side that goes up. We'll slide that guy on. Washer goes on next. Once you get that, you got your cleaned up inner piece here. We'll go ahead and slide that through, drop it down in there, and get that to come all the way through like that. This piece goes on the end there, and then we'll put all of this unit with everything cleaned back up, everything stacked in order. We'll insert this back into the outer tube, push it all the way down. We'll take our Allen bolt here, and I'm just going to put a little bit of grease, not much, but just a little bit of grease on the threads of this bolt, just to keep it from seizing up, making it easier to go in there. And we'll put this here in the bottom. You should feel it, as long as you got everything dropped all the way down in there. Should be able to get that to start. There it goes. Get our handle, put it right back in there the way we had it to take it apart. I've got my impact. And tighten that back up. Now this is a 12 volt impact, so it's pretty weak. That's why I hammered on it. If you've got it actually took a 20 volt DeWalt impact to break that loose. So just be careful that you don't over torque that. I don't know the torque spec on it, and even if I had the torque spec, there's really no way that I could torque it because I don't have the right tool to hold the other end of it. So, all right, so we've got the Allen bolts tight. We've got everything put back together to this point. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the vise. Vertical now. Let that come down. Make sure our tube is all clean. Make sure the bore where the seals ride is all cleaned out. We're going to take our seals, new seals here. I'm going to put a little bit of grease in the lip of the seal, and then I'm going to grease the outside just a little bit. Just a nice light film here. This is just a plastic bag. They make tools for all this, but I don't have them. So just take a Ziploc bag, throw it over this. This is just to prevent the edge of this from damaging the new seal that you're getting ready to put on. Get the seal started, slide it down like that. Get it started down in there. Now, again, they have tools for this, but I don't have them. So what I've done is take a piece of 1 1/4" for this application, 1 1/4" PVC, cut it in half that way, and makes a nice little seal driver. Snaps right on there, and I've got my dead blow here. I'm just gonna be easy and drive that seal. Okay, so we've got the fork seal driven all the way down in as far as it'll go. Now we've got the dust seal, and we're gonna put our bag back on here again real quick. I've got this thing greased up. I'll slide it. And the dust seal, guys, it shouldn't be that hard to press the dust seal in, because it's really not holding. It's really not holding much. It's just a wiper, and it kind of protects the actual fork seal. So you may or may not have to tap it down, but it should go a little bit easier than the fork seal. Okay, I've got that driven down in there. So now we're going to take our clip that we took out, slide that down in there, and we'll just grab a screwdriver here. This is pretty easy to go back in place. Alright. I'm just going to check. You just want to make sure that you got all points of that clip engaged in the groove that rides, or there's a groove inside of here that the clip slips into. Just make sure that you've got that engaged, and there we go. The fork seals are done. Just gonna clean that up, make sure don't have any debris on it. Alright, so now that we've got those done, we'll move on to the next part, which is putting the spring back in, and I'm going to show you guys. This is where the mods come in that we're going to do to these forks to make them a little bit stiffer, make them a little bit better for riding, for trail riding, for a normal adult to be on this thing, because it's pretty soft. So we'll come back and show you what we're doing with the springs. Alright guys, so we've got the fork back together, got the new seals in, everything cleaned up. We're basically ready to drop the spring back in it and fill it up with oil. This is where we're getting into a couple mods that we're doing to this fork to improve the performance of it. So here's our stock fork spring, and it goes into the fork just like this. Our little thrust washer here, and this is a spring spacer that's just factory. That spring spacer helps compress the spring a little bit, and that's what we call spring preload. We know that the forks on this bike are way too soft the way that they are. I rode it, it was unrideable, it was so soft. So obviously the correct way to do it is to replace the fork spring with one that is a stiffer spring to give you the results that you're looking for. Obviously on this bike it's super budget, and we don't want to spend it $100 or $200 on fork springs when we only paid $800 for the bike. So what I've done here is cut a piece of PVC pipe, and this is 3/4 inch CPVC pipe. That's a Schedule 80, I believe. Ignore that it's orange. This is actually for use in fire systems. I stole it from work. You could use, I think you could probably get away with Schedule 40 PVC, or you should be able to get this stuff from a hardware store in gray, and that should be Schedule 80 CPVC. I believe it would be gray if you went to a plumbing supply shop or just like Home Depot or something like that. So anyways, this is 3/4 inch, and what you're looking for is something that matches up close to the diameter of the spring, which as you can see here, it matches up almost perfectly. Just by luck, it perfectly slides inside of the old stock spring spacer. So we're going to actually put the unit in like this, and you can see this is how much more the spring is going to be compressed once we assemble it inside the fork. We are just total shot in the dark here. I'm spacing it out 1.25 inches, 1.25 inches. That's going to compress the spring more, which is going to have more preload in the spring, more stored energy. It's going to make our fork a stiffer fork. Now this is obviously, this might work good, or we may need to change the length and shorten this up, or whatever. We'll see when we ride it. So that's just going to help everything hold the bike, the rider weight and the bike weight up more in the stroke. It's also going to make the spring stiffer because it's already pre-compressed. So that's one way we're going to cheat and get these forks to be a little bit stiffer. So another way that we're going to cheat and we're going to get these forks to be a little bit stiffer is we're going with some 15 weight fork oil. Now normal fork oil is 5 weight, and there's a couple things that you need to know if you're going to go change the weight of your fork oil. Now there's going to be people in the comments that says this is garbage and you don't want to do it. This fork is a cheap, basic, conventional fork. There are no clickers on it. We cannot adjust the compression damping, and we cannot adjust the rebound damping. So a cheat for that is to put thicker, heavier weight fork oil in the fork, and that will make the compression harder. The downside to it is it's going to make the rebound slower, and there's nothing that we can do about that. It's just a trade-off that you're making. In certain this may not be the best route to go for all applications, but in this bike it's going to be a trail bike for a novice dirt rider, which is my dad. It's also an XR200. I mean, it's not going to be going Mach 6. We're just looking to make the fork overall stiffer so that it doesn't bottom out when he goes over obstacles or goes through washouts and stuff like that. It was really, really soft before. So we're going to put 15 weight fork oil in, and we're going to make a longer spring spacer to put more preload on the spring. That should make these forks stiffer all the way around, and hopefully make the bike a lot more rideable. So, okay, so we know what mods we're doing, so we're just going to go ahead and collapse the fork all the way and drop our spring in there. We will put our thrust washer on, and we'll just go ahead and slide the fork and extend it like that. We know we've got our spring in there, and our thrust washer is seated in the end of the spring. We'll put it in the vise. We'll take our measuring cup here, and I'm putting 12.8 ounces of fluid in here. Getting the correct number for this was not easy on the internet, and I'm just basically going off some forum posts. But we're going to put 12.8 ounces in this fork. And this could also be used for tuning. You can put more fork oil in, and that'll also stiffen the forks up, but I'm not familiar with these forks and they're pretty small, so we're not going to do that on this. We're just going to go with the recommended amount. So I'm just going to pour that in like so. This is where work the fork back a couple times. After you get about half the amount of oil in there, work the fork back and forth a couple times. You'll hear it bubbling. That's just the oil getting worked in all the inner chamber and stuff. I'm gonna pour it in a little bit at a time here and exercise the fork, and you'll hear all kinds of air bubbles and stuff getting worked out. Okay, I've got all the fork fluid in. You can hear me working it back and forth, and you'll eventually hear it get smooth. It won't be bubbling air and stuff. That's nice and smooth. So we're gonna take our spring spacer that we made. I'm gonna drop that in, extend the fork all the way up like so. I'm gonna push down, get those threads started, and I'll pull it out, make it easier here. We've got our oil in, springs and spacers in. Tighten that up, and we're done. Seems like the rebound's working good, no bubbling, and I can tell you just right off the bat that that's a lot stiffer than the stock setup. So at this point you're ready to throw your fork boot back on and throw it back on the bike. So hopefully I answered some questions for you guys on these XR200 forks. I had a lot of people asking about them and it is a little bit unclear how you're gonna get these things apart without that tool, but I had the trusty impact here and I was able to break it loose no problem. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.